The rope burns on Josephine Riley's wrists had started bleeding again by the time the wagon lurched to a stop outside a ramshackle trading post in the Arizona Territory. And she knew with absolute certainty that her cousin Daniel had just bartered away her life for his own survival. It was the spring of 1878, and the journey from Santa Fe had taken nearly 3 weeks through unforgiving desert terrain that seemed determined to kill anyone foolish enough to cross it. Josephine had watched her cousin grow increasingly desperate as their supplies dwindled, and the men tracking them drew closer. She had seen the calculation in his eyes when the stranger approached their camp 2 nights ago, offering safe passage through Apache territory in exchange for something valuable. She just never imagined Daniel would consider her valuable enough to trade. "Get out," the stranger said now, his voice rough as gravel. He was a thick-set man with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, and he smelled of whiskey and unwashed clothes. His name was Garrett, and he had made it clear during the past 2 days that he considered Josephine his property now, bought and paid for with the promise of getting Daniel safely to California. Josephine's legs trembled as she climbed down from the wagon. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, turning the air thick and oppressive. Through the shimmering heat, she could see the buildings of what looked like a small settlement in the distance. A weathered sign proclaimed it Camp Verde, though the place looked like it had seen better days. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse from lack of water. "My cousin made a mistake. I have family in Texas who will pay for my return." Garrett laughed, a sound without humor. "Your cousin made a deal, girl, and I always collect what's owed to me." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to bruise. "Now get inside before I lose my patience." The trading post was dim and stifling, filled with the smell of tobacco and old leather. 2 other men sat at a rough-hewn table, playing cards and drinking. They looked up with interest when Garrett dragged Josephine inside. "This the payment?" one of them asked, grinning to reveal missing teeth. "She'll do for what we need," Garrett replied. "Pretty enough to fetch a good price down in Mexico, or we can put her to work here until someone makes an offer." Josephine felt her stomach turn. She had heard stories about women who disappeared into Mexico, never to be heard from again. She thought of her mother back in Santa Fe, probably sick with worry by now. Daniel had convinced her that traveling to California would give them both a fresh start after their parents died of fever last winter. Instead, he had led her into a nightmare and then abandoned her to save himself. "I need water," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "and food. You cannot expect to sell someone who looks half dead." Garrett considered this, then nodded to one of the men. "Give her some water, nothing else until she learns some manners." The water was warm and tasted of metal, but Josephine drank it gratefully. Her mind raced, searching for any possible escape. The trading post had only one door that she could see, and the windows were too small to climb through. Even if she managed to get outside, where would she run? The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, and she had no horse, no supplies, no weapon. "Lock her in the back room," Garrett said. "I have business to attend to. We will decide what to do with her tonight." The back room was barely large enough to lie down in, with no furniture except a pile of old blankets that reeked of mildew. Josephine sank to the floor, finally allowing herself to cry. She was 19 years old, and her life was over before it had truly begun. All because she had trusted her cousin, believed his promises of a better future. She must have dozed off despite her terror, because the next thing she knew, someone was shaking her shoulder. Josephine jerked awake, her heart pounding, expecting to see Garrett's scarred face. Instead, she found herself looking up at a young man with dark hair and startlingly blue eyes. "Easy now," he said quietly. "I am not here to hurt you. My name is Mason Zimmerman, and I am getting you out of here." Josephine blinked, certain she must be dreaming. The man crouching beside her wore dusty traveling clothes and a well-worn gun belt. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with a lean, strong build and a face that might have been handsome if not for the hard set of his jaw. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone who does not hold with slavers and kidnappers," Mason replied. "I was buying supplies when I heard Garrett and his men talking about their new acquisition. This territory has enough problems without men like him making things worse." He pulled a knife from his belt and carefully cut the ropes binding her wrists. "Can you walk?" "I think so." Josephine rubbed her raw wrists, wincing. "But how did you get past them?" "I brought them a bottle of whiskey laced with enough laudanum to put a horse to sleep." "They will wake up with terrible headaches, but they will wake up." Mason helped her to her feet. "We need to move quickly, though. I cannot guarantee how long the drug will last." Josephine followed him through the darkened trading post, her heart in her throat. True to his word, Garrett and his companions were slumped over the table, snoring loudly. Mason led her outside where 2 horses waited, already saddled and loaded with supplies. "You planned this," Josephine said in wonder. "I told you, I do not hold with slavers." Mason mounted his horse, a sturdy bay gelding, then reached down to help Josephine up onto the second horse, a gentle-looking mare. "Can you ride?" "Yes, my father taught me when I was young." Josephine settled into the saddle, feeling steadier now despite her exhaustion. "Where are we going?" "My ranch is about 15 miles north of here. You will be safe there while we figure out what to do next." Mason urged his horse forward, and Josephine followed, glancing back nervously at the trading post. They rode in silence for the first hour, putting distance between themselves and Camp Verde. The sun was beginning to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Despite the circumstances, Josephine found herself struck by the stark beauty of the landscape. She had spent most of her life in Santa Fe, where the mountains provided a different kind of grandeur. This open, endless expanse was both terrifying and magnificent. "Thank you," she said finally, "for saving me. I do not even know how to begin to repay you." Mason glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "You do not owe me anything. What Garrett did was wrong, and your cousin was a coward for allowing it." "He was not always like that," Josephine said, though even as she spoke the words, she wondered if they were true. "After our parents died, he changed, became bitter and angry at the world, but I never thought he would actually sell me like livestock." "Some men show their true nature when times get hard," Mason said. "My father used to say that adversity does not build character, it reveals it." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was. He died 2 years ago along with my mother and younger sister. Cholera took them all within a week." Mason's voice was matter-of-fact, but Josephine could hear the pain beneath it. "I've been running the ranch alone since then, with the help of a few hired hands. I am sorry for your loss." Josephine understood that kind of grief, the sudden absence of everyone who mattered. It must be difficult, managing everything on your own. "I manage. The ranch is not large, but we raise good cattle and the land is fertile enough for grazing." Mason pointed ahead to where a cluster of lights had appeared in the gathering darkness. "That is my place. Nothing fancy, but it is home." The ranch consisted of a modest house, a barn, and several outbuildings. As they rode into the yard, 2 men emerged from the barn, hands on their weapons until they recognized Mason. "Boss, we were getting worried," one of them called out. He was an older man with gray hair and a weathered face. "You said you would be back before dark." "I ran into some trouble in town, Samuel," Mason replied, dismounting. "This is Miss Josephine Riley. She will be staying with us for a while as my guest. Josephine, this is Samuel Crawford and his son Benjamin. They have worked for my family for nearly 10 years. Benjamin, who looked to be about Josephine's age, tipped his hat to her. "Pleased to meet you, miss. I will take care of your horse." "Thank you." Josephine allowed Mason to help her down, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. "Samuel, would you ask your wife to prepare the guest room?" Mason said. "Miss Riley has had a difficult journey." "Right away, boss." Samuel hurried toward a smaller house near the barn, presumably where he and his family lived. Mason guided Josephine to the main house, supporting her when she stumbled on the steps. Inside, the house was simple but clean, with sturdy furniture and colorful woven rugs on the floor. It felt like a real home, lived in and cared for. "Sit," Mason said, pointing to a chair near the fireplace. "I will get you some water and food." Josephine sank into the chair gratefully, her eyes drifting closed. She heard Mason moving around in what must be the kitchen, the sound of dishes and water being poured. When he returned, he brought a cup of cool water and a plate of bread and cheese. "Eat slowly," he advised. "Your stomach will not thank you if you rush." Josephine forced herself to take small bites, though she wanted to devour everything in sight. The bread was fresh and the cheese was sharp and creamy. It was the best meal she had eaten in weeks. "Mrs. Crawford will be here soon to help you get settled," Mason said, sitting down across from her. "She is a good woman, very kind. You will be safe here, I promise you that." "Why are you doing this?" Josephine asked. "You do not know me. I could be anyone, could have done anything." Mason was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "I saw the rope burns on your wrists. I heard the fear in Garrett's voice when he talked about what he planned to do with you. That was enough." Before Josephine could respond, a plump woman with kind eyes bustled into the house. "Mr. Mason, I have the guest room all ready." "You poor dear," she said, turning to Josephine. "Let us get you cleaned up and into a proper bed. You look dead on your feet." Mrs. Crawford ushered Josephine upstairs to a small but comfortable room with a real bed covered in a patchwork quilt. There was even a basin of warm water and clean towels waiting. "I will leave you to wash up," Mrs. Crawford said. "There is a nightdress in the chest there that belonged to Mr. Mason's sister. I think it should fit you well enough. Come down if you need anything, otherwise just rest." "You are safe now, child." Alone, Josephine stripped off her filthy traveling clothes and washed away days of dust and sweat. The water turned brown, but she felt human again by the time she finished. The nightdress was soft white cotton, worn but clean. She climbed into bed, expecting to lie awake worrying about Garrett and her uncertain future. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of cooking bacon. For a moment, Josephine could not remember where she was, then everything came flooding back. The trading post, Garrett's threats, Mason's unexpected rescue. She sat up slowly, testing her sore muscles. Everything ached, but she was alive and free. Someone had left a simple dress draped over a chair, along with fresh undergarments and stockings. They were all slightly too large for Josephine's slim frame, but they were clean and whole, which was more than she could say for her own clothes. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, following the sounds and smells of breakfast. Mason was sitting at the kitchen table with Samuel and Benjamin, drinking coffee and discussing the day's work. He looked up when Josephine entered, and something in his expression made her heart skip unexpectedly. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Josephine admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality. Sit down and have some breakfast, Mrs. Crawford said, appearing from the kitchen with a plate piled high with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "You need to get some proper food in you." Josephine sat, feeling shy under the friendly attention. She was not used to kindness from strangers. "This is too much." "Nonsense," Mrs. Crawford replied. "You eat every bite. And then we need to have a talk about what happened to you and what you want to do next." Over breakfast, Josephine told them the whole story, starting with her parents' death and ending with her cousin's betrayal. It felt both cathartic and humiliating to speak it all aloud. "Your cousin should be horsewhipped," Samuel said when she finished. "Selling his own blood like that." "The question is what to do now," Mason said thoughtfully. "You mentioned family in Texas, an aunt and uncle in Houston," Josephine said, "though I have not seen them in years. I am not even sure they would take me in, and I have no money for the journey." "Garrett will be looking for you," Benjamin pointed out. "He paid for safe passage with her, which means he will want to recoup his loss." "Let him look," Mason said, his voice hard. "If he sets foot on my property, he will regret it. But Benjamin is right. We need to be careful. Josephine, you are welcome to stay here as long as you need. I could use some help with the household, and Mrs. Crawford has been saying she needs an extra pair of hands." "I do not want to be a burden," Josephine protested. "You would not be," Mrs. Crawford assured her. "I have been caring for this big house by myself since Mason's mother passed. Some help would be most welcome, and it would give you a chance to earn some money while you decide what to do." Josephine looked around at their honest, kind faces and felt something loosen in her chest. "I would like that very much." Over the following weeks, Josephine settled into life on the ranch. She helped Mrs. Crawford with cooking and cleaning, learned to tend the vegetable garden, and even assisted with some of the lighter ranch work. The days were long and the work was hard, but it was honest labor, and she went to bed each night with a sense of accomplishment rather than dread. Mason was a fair employer and a thoughtful man. He never pushed her to talk about her ordeal, but he was always available if she needed to. Josephine found herself watching him as he worked, admiring the easy way he handled the horses and the patient manner in which he dealt with problems. He was nothing like the men she had known in Santa Fe, who measured their worth in swagger and empty promises. One evening about a month after her arrival, Josephine was washing dishes when Mason came in from the barn. He had been working on repairing a fence all day, and he looked tired but satisfied. "Need any help?" he asked. "I am nearly finished," Josephine replied, surprised. Usually Mason left the household tasks to her and Mrs. Crawford. "Did you get the fence repaired, finally?" "That section has been giving me trouble for weeks." Mason picked up a towel and began drying the dishes she had washed. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Josephine's heart quickened nervously. "What is it?" "There is a dance in town this Saturday." "Nothing fancy, just some music and socializing. I thought you might like to go get out of the ranch for an evening. Mrs. Crawford would come too, and Samuel and Benjamin. It would be safe." "I do not know," Josephine said hesitantly. "What if Garrett is there?" "He has not been seen around Camp Verde since that night," Mason said. "Folks say he and his men moved on after someone robbed them, but if it would make you uncomfortable, we do not have to go." Josephine considered. She had been hiding on the ranch, afraid to venture back into town. But she could not hide forever, and the idea of music and dancing was tempting. She had loved to dance before everything fell apart. "I would like to go," she said finally, "but I have nothing suitable to wear." Mrs. Crawford mentioned that. "She says Mason's mother had some dresses stored away that might fit you with some alteration. She would be happy to help you prepare something." "Your mother's dresses?" Josephine felt uncertain. "Would you mind?" Mason's expression softened. "My mother would have wanted them to be used, not gathering dust in a trunk. She was about your size from what I remember. I think she would have liked you." The compliment made Josephine's cheeks warm. "Thank you. I would be honored to wear one of her dresses." Saturday arrived warm and clear. Mrs. Crawford had worked magic with a dress of soft blue calico, taking in the waist and hem to fit Josephine's smaller frame. When Josephine looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked healthy again, her face no longer gaunt with hunger and fear. The dance was held in Camp Verde's largest building, a combination church and community hall. By the time they arrived, The place was already crowded with ranchers, townspeople, and families from the surrounding area. A small group of musicians played fiddle and guitar in one corner while couples whirled across the floor. Josephine felt nervous as they entered, but Mason stayed close by her side, his presence reassuring. Several people greeted him warmly, and he introduced Josephine as a friend staying at his ranch. She saw some curious looks and heard whispered speculation, but no one was openly rude. "Would you like to dance?" Mason asked after they had been there for about an hour. Josephine nodded, not trusting her voice. Mason led her onto the floor as the musicians struck up a lively reel. He was a better dancer than she expected, guiding her through the steps with easy confidence. Josephine found herself laughing as they spun and turned, the music washing away her lingering anxiety. They danced several more times, and Josephine noticed that Mason never asked anyone else to dance, despite the hopeful looks from several young women. She told herself it did not mean anything, but she could not deny the flutter in her chest every time his hand touched hers. During a break in the music, they stepped outside for some fresh air. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. "Thank you for bringing me tonight," Josephine said. "I needed this more than I realized." "You have been through a terrible ordeal," Mason replied. "You deserve some happiness." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, then Mason cleared his throat. "Josephine, I want you to know that you are welcome to stay at the ranch as long as you want. Not just as an employee, but as part of the household. You fit there, and I would miss your presence if you left." Josephine's breath caught. She had been thinking the same thing, wondering how she could bear to leave this place that had become home. "I would like to stay," she said softly. "If you are certain I am not imposing." "You could never impose." Mason turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intense in the moonlight. "I find myself hoping you will stay for reasons that have nothing to do with housework or cooking." "What reasons?" Josephine whispered, though she thought she knew. "Because I care for you," Mason said simply. "More than I probably should, given how recently you came into my life. But there it is." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I care for you too. I have for weeks now, but I did not dare hope you might feel the same." Mason smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face. "Then we are both fools, dancing around our feelings when we could have been honest from the start." He took her hand, and Josephine felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This man had saved her life and then given her a reason to live it. She had started to fall in love with him somewhere between washing dishes and tending gardens, in the quiet moments of safety and kindness he provided. "May I kiss you?" Mason asked. "Yes," Josephine breathed. The kiss was gentle and sweet, a promise of more to come. When they finally pulled apart, Josephine was smiling so hard her face hurt. They returned to the dance hand in hand, and if anyone noticed the change between them, they were kind enough not to comment. Josephine danced the rest of the night in a haze of happiness, barely aware of anyone but Mason. The ride home was quiet but comfortable. Mrs. Crawford dozed in the back of the wagon while Samuel drove, and Benjamin rode alongside on his horse. Mason sat close to Josephine, their shoulders touching, fingers intertwined beneath the blanket covering their laps. "What happens now?" Josephine asked softly. "We take things one day at a time," Mason replied. "No rushing, no pressure. We court properly, let things develop as they will, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable. When the time is right, I hope to make you my wife." The words sent a thrill through Josephine. "I would like that very much." The following months passed in a blur of contentment. Mason courted Josephine with old-fashioned propriety, always respectful but clearly devoted. They took walks in the evening after the day's work was done, talking about everything and nothing. Mason told her about growing up on the ranch, about his dreams of expanding the herd and building a legacy. Josephine shared her own dreams, things she had never dared voice before, about having a home and family of her own. In August, Mason rode into Prescott to file some paperwork for the ranch and returned with a small velvet box. That evening, he asked Josephine to walk with him to a spot overlooking the valley. "My father proposed to my mother in this exact place," Mason said as they stood watching the sunset paint the sky. "He said he wanted to start their life together at the most beautiful spot he knew." Josephine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Mason must hear it. Mason took her hand, then dropped to one knee. "Josephine Riley, I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You are brave and kind and strong, and you make me want to be a better man. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Josephine said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The ring was a simple gold band with a small sapphire, modest but beautiful. Mason slipped it onto her finger, then stood and kissed her deeply, both of them laughing and crying at once. They were married in October, when the worst of the summer heat had passed. The ceremony was held at the church in Camp Verde, with Samuel's wife officiating since there was no permanent preacher in town. Mrs. Crawford cried through the entire service, while Samuel and Benjamin stood as witnesses. Several of the neighboring ranchers and their families attended, welcoming Josephine officially into the community. Josephine wore a dress of white lace that had belonged to Mason's mother, altered to fit her with loving care. Mason looked impossibly handsome in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his blue eyes shining with emotion. As they exchanged vows, Josephine thought about how far she had come since that terrible day at the trading post. She had been sold and abandoned, treated as property rather than a person. But Mason had shown her what real safety felt like, what love and respect and partnership could be. He had given her not just a home, but a future. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, both of them nervous but eager. Mason was patient and gentle, taking his time to ensure Josephine's comfort. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, whispering promises and plans. "I want to give you everything," Mason murmured against her hair. "Everything you deserve. You already have," Josephine replied. "You gave me my life back." The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. A drought in the spring threatened the cattle, and they had to dig deeper wells to keep the herd watered. One of the hired hands quit without notice, leaving them short-handed during a crucial period. Josephine learned to help with the ranch work when needed, proving herself capable with both horses and cattle. But through it all, their love deepened. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, how to work together and support each other. Josephine discovered that Mason sang while he worked, usually off-key but enthusiastically. Mason learned that Josephine was terrible at cards but brilliant at managing the ranch accounts. In the spring of 1880, Josephine realized she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Mason, wanting to be sure. When she finally shared the news one evening after dinner, Mason picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." The pregnancy was difficult at times, especially during the scorching summer months, but Josephine had never been happier. Mason was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about her health. Mrs. Crawford fussed over her like a mother hen, making sure she ate properly and rested enough. Their son was born on a cold November morning, arriving after a long and exhausting labor. Mason paced outside the bedroom the entire time, refusing to leave despite Samuel's attempts to distract him with ranch work. When Mrs. Crawford finally emerged to announce that both mother and baby were healthy, Mason rushed inside to find Josephine propped up in bed, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet your son," Josephine said tiredly but triumphantly. Mason approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something. When he looked down at the red-faced, wrinkled baby, his eyes filled with tears. "He is perfect." "What should we name him?" Josephine asked. They had discussed names for months but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Mason knew. "James," he said. "James Samuel Zimmerman, after both our fathers." James was a healthy, hungry baby who quickly became the center of the household. Mason was a devoted father, often walking the floor with his son in the middle of the night when James refused to sleep. Josephine watched her husband tenderly care for their child and fell in love with him all over again. The years passed swiftly. James grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's brown eyes. In 1882, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Grace. She had Mason's blue eyes and a temperament as sunny as her name suggested. The ranch prospered under their management. Mason expanded the herd and bought additional grazing land. Josephine managed the household with efficiency and began raising chickens and selling eggs in town, providing additional income. They hired more help, built a bigger barn, and slowly improved the property. One evening in the summer of 1884, Mason and Josephine sat on the porch watching James and Grace play in the yard. James was teaching his little sister how to catch grasshoppers, both of them shrieking with laughter. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I had not walked into that trading post that day?" Mason asked. Josephine took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Sometimes. But then I remember that you did walk in and you saved me. You gave me everything I have now." "We gave each other everything," Mason corrected gently. "I was existing before you came, just going through the motions. You made me feel alive again." "We were both lost," Josephine said, "and we found each other." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. Josephine thought about how terrified she had been that day in Camp Verde, certain her life was over. She had been sold by someone she trusted, treated as property, reduced to nothing. But she had survived. More than that, she had thrived. She had found love and safety with a man who cherished her, who saw her as an equal partner. She had built a life that was entirely her own, surrounded by people who valued her. In 1886, Josephine gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Daniel and Michael. The choice of Daniel as a name had been Josephine's suggestion, and Mason had questioned it at first. "After what your cousin did," he had said. "Not after him," Josephine explained. "Despite him. That name will not be associated with betrayal in our family. It will mean love and trust, and everything he should have been but was not." Mason had understood then, and agreed. With 4 children, the house was constantly noisy and chaotic. Josephine often collapsed into bed exhausted at night, but she was happy. This was the family she had dreamed of, the home she had yearned for during those dark days after her parents died. Mrs. Crawford had retired from daily work by then, though she still lived on the property with Samuel. Benjamin had married a girl from town and built his own house on the ranch. The Zimmerman spread had become not just a business but a community, with multiple families working together toward common goals. One day, in late 1887, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Josephine was hanging laundry when she saw him approaching and felt a chill of old fear. But when the man dismounted, she saw he was elderly and had a kind face. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he asked politely. "My name is Thomas Riley. I believe I am your uncle." Josephine's mouth fell open. "Uncle Thomas." "From Houston, the same. I have been searching for you for years, since I heard about your parents' deaths and your disappearance. I finally tracked down your cousin Daniel in California. He told me what he did, how he traded you to that man for safe passage." The old man's face hardened. "I am ashamed to share blood with him," "How did you find me?" Josephine asked, still stunned. "It took time and a lot of asking around, but I heard a story in Camp Verde about a rancher who rescued a young woman from slavers, and I had a feeling it might be you." Thomas looked around the property approvingly. "It looks like you landed on your feet." "More than that," Josephine said. "I found my home." Mason came out of the barn then, alerted by the sound of voices. He assessed the stranger quickly, hand resting on his gun until Josephine called out to him. "Mason, this is my Uncle Thomas. He has been looking for me." Over dinner that evening, Thomas explained that he and his wife had been devastated to learn of Josephine's parents' deaths. They had written immediately, offering to take in both Josephine and Daniel, but the letter had apparently never reached them. "Daniel told me he never received any letter," Thomas said heavily. "But I wonder now if he did and chose to ignore it. He always was a selfish boy. What happened to him?" Josephine asked, realizing she had not thought about her cousin in years. "Last I heard, he was working in a mine outside San Francisco, not doing well by all accounts, drinking too much, always in debt." Thomas shook his head. "Some men destroy themselves with their own poor choices." "I am sorry," Josephine said, and meant it. Despite everything, Daniel had been family once. "Do not waste your pity on him," Thomas said. "He made his choices. You, on the other hand, have clearly made excellent choices." He smiled at Mason and the children. "I am proud of you, niece." "Your mother would be proud, too." Thomas stayed for a week, getting to know his great-nieces and great-nephews. Before he left, he insisted on signing over a small inheritance that had been set aside for Josephine, money her maternal grandmother had left. "It is not a fortune," he said, "but it is yours by right, and I want you to have it." The money allowed them to finally build the larger house Mason had been planning for years. Construction began in the spring of 1888 and was completed by fall. The new house had room for all the children, a proper kitchen, and even a parlor for entertaining guests. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Mason gave Josephine a locket containing tiny photographs of their 4 children. 10 years, he said wonderingly. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "The best 10 years of my life," Josephine replied truthfully. They were standing on the porch of their new house, watching the sun set over land that now stretched for miles in all directions. The ranch was successful beyond anything they had initially dreamed. They had built something real and lasting together. "You remember what you said to me on our wedding day?" Mason asked. "That I had given you your life back, I remember. I have been thinking about that." "I did not give you your life back, Josephine. You took it back. You survived something terrible, and instead of letting it break you, you became stronger. You built this life, this family, this home. I was just lucky enough to be here while you did it." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. "We built it together. Every bit of it. Together," Mason agreed, pulling her close. "Always together." The years continued to pass, marked by the usual joys and sorrows of life. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1890, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the valley he had loved. Mrs. Crawford followed him 2 years later, and Josephine mourned the woman who had been like a mother to her. James grew tall and strong, showing a natural talent for ranch work. Grace was clever and bookish, always reading everything she could get her hands on. The twins were wild and adventurous, constantly getting into mischief but always watching out for each other. In 1895, when Josephine was 36 years old, she discovered she was pregnant again. The pregnancy was more difficult than the others, and Mason worried constantly. But in the spring of 1896, they welcomed another daughter, whom they named Martha after Mason's mother. "Our surprise baby," Mason said, cradling his newborn daughter with practiced ease. "Our unexpected blessing." Martha was the joy of the household, adored by her older siblings and doted on by her parents. She had Josephine's laugh and Mason's stubborn determination, a combination that proved both delightful and challenging. As the century drew to a close, the ranch continued to thrive. James, now 18, had taken on more responsibility and showed every sign of being a capable rancher in his own right. Grace had announced her intention to become a teacher and was studying diligently for the qualifying exams. The twins, at 13, were still finding their paths, but showed promise. One evening in late 1899, Josephine and Mason took a rare moment alone, walking through the property as they had done so many times before. The land had changed over the years, improved and cultivated, but the essential beauty remained. "You ever wonder what our lives would have been like if things had gone differently?" Josephine asked. "Sometimes," Mason admitted, "but I cannot imagine any life better than this one. Can you?" Josephine thought about it, really thought. She considered all the pain and fear that had brought her to Mason's ranch that day in 1878. She remembered the terror of being sold, the helplessness of being treated as property. But she also remembered Mason's kindness, the way he had offered her safety without demands or expectations. From that terrible moment had grown everything she held dear: her marriage, her children, her home, her life. If she could go back and change things, prevent her parents' deaths or her cousin's betrayal, would she? Would she risk losing all of this? "No," she said finally. "I would not change anything. Every bit of pain led me here, to you and this life we have built. It was worth it." Mason stopped walking and turned to face her, his blue eyes still as intense as they had been the first night he kissed her. "I love you, Josephine Zimmerman. I loved you the moment I saw you in that filthy trading post, terrified but defiant. I loved you when you were washing dishes in my kitchen, trying so hard to earn your keep. I loved you when you walked down the aisle toward me. I loved you when you gave me our children. And I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Josephine whispered. "You gave me real safety, Mason. Not just physical safety, but the safety to be myself, to dream, to hope. You saw me as a person when others saw me as property. You treated me as an equal when others would have treated me as less. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They stood together in the fading light, two people who had found each other against all odds. Behind them was their home, warm and welcoming, filled with the voices of their children. Before them stretched miles of land they had worked together to build into something lasting. The new century was approaching, bringing with it unknown challenges and changes. But Josephine was not afraid. She had survived the worst life could throw at her and had emerged not just intact but triumphant. She had a partner who valued her, children who loved her, and a home that was truly hers. As they walked back toward the house, their hands intertwined, Josephine thought about the girl she had been at 19, terrified and alone in that trading post. If she could speak to that girl now, she would tell her to hold on, that safety was coming. That a man with blue eyes and a kind heart would rescue her, and together they would build something beautiful from the ashes of her old life. The years ahead would bring more changes, more challenges, more joys and sorrows. James would eventually take over the ranch, running it with his father's wisdom and his mother's efficiency. Grace would indeed become a teacher, educating children throughout the territory. The twins would find their own paths, one becoming a veterinarian and the other a horse breeder. Martha would grow up surrounded by love, never knowing the fear her mother had once faced. But all of that was still to come. For now, in this moment, Josephine was simply happy. She was home, she was loved, and she was safe. Real safety, the kind that came from being cherished and valued, the kind that no one could ever take away. As they reached the porch, the door flew open and their children spilled out, all talking at once about something urgent and important. Mason laughed and allowed himself to be dragged inside to arbitrate some dispute. Josephine followed more slowly, pausing in the doorway to look back at the land spread out before her. This was her kingdom, earned through survival and built through love. Every fence post, every head of cattle, every square foot of this ranch represented a choice she and Mason had made together. They had taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into the best life she could imagine. The desert wind blew warm and gentle, carrying with it the smell of sage and dust and home. Josephine smiled, then turned and walked inside, closing the door behind her. Outside, the Arizona sky stretched vast and endless, stars beginning to emerge in the deepening twilight. Inside, her family waited, her life waited, her future waited. She was Josephine Zimmerman, survivor and rancher's wife, mother and partner. She had been sold as property and redeemed by love. She had been betrayed by blood and saved by a stranger who became everything to her. Her story could have ended in that trading post, could have become just another tragedy of the Wild West. Instead, it had become a love story, the kind that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The kind where the cowboy really did save the girl, but the girl saved herself too. The kind where real safety was not just about protection from danger, but about finding someone who saw your worth and chose to cherish it every single day. As she joined her family in the warm, bright kitchen, surrounded by laughter and love and the comfortable chaos of her life, Josephine Riley Zimmerman knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her journey had been hard and painful, marked by betrayal and fear, but it had led her home, and home, she had learned, was not just a place. It was the man who had risked himself to save her, the children they had created together, the life they had built from nothing. Home was safety and love and belonging, all the things her cousin had tried to sell but which could never truly be bought or traded. Home was here in this house, on this land, with this family. Home was the hand that reached for hers in the darkness, the voice that whispered comfort in times of sorrow, the heart that beat in rhythm with her own. Home was Mason and the children and the life they shared. And after everything she had survived, everything she had endured and overcome, Josephine had finally, truly come home.